So recently, news of the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse, his assassination has been reported by several different outlets, and there's a lot to the story. It gets very convoluted, but what happened is that the president was assassinated in an attack on his home in the outskirts of Port-au-Prince on Wednesday. Now, in a statement, Haitian Prime Minister Claude Joseph said that a group of unidentified individuals had attacked the private residence of the president, killing him and injuring the First Lady. And so details, of course, are trickling out about this, how these were very well-organized, armed mercenaries that had did the strike, and then this pulled off this assassination, and even claimed to be on behalf of the DEA. And so, again, there's a lot of confusion going on here. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different players involved. And what I'm going to try to do is try to make sense of it the best that I can. And I'm going to start, of course, with the presidency, the contentious presidency of Jovenel Moïse. And so, now look, he had taken power in 2017. Moïse had. Now, this was a very contentious election. Like, if you thought that 2016 was contentious and 2020, no, the 2016 election in Haiti was even worse. There were, of course, allegations of voter fraud, vote rigging. They ended up basically redoing the first round of elections. And, of course, Moïse ended up with getting about 55% of the vote. But as a consequence of all the chaos, he didn't actually take power until 14 months after the election. So already insane. And the reason that I bring that up is because that was actually a big point of contention for Moïse, and it led to what he did later, an attempted coup. So now, super important, right? Now, you all remember during Trump's administration, during his presidency, he kept joking, or, well, I don't know if he was joking or not, but he kept saying things like, I should get an extra year with the Mueller report, the impeachment hoax that stole a year out of my presidency. I should be able to serve an extra year. And we all laughed and laughed, right? Well, it turns out Moïse actually was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I am going to take an extra year, or I'm going to take, extra time and to serve as president anyway, even after the end of my term. So that's what happened. So he was accused by critics of orchestrating a coup to stay in power beyond February 7th, when his term had officially ended. So I'm going to go to Democracy Now! Here, because as a result of that, massive protest among Haitian citizens. In fact, they said, according to the report, for months, Haitians staged large protests against Moïse, demanding that he leave office. However, Moïse had clung to power with support from the Biden administration, which backed his claims that his term should end next year. So the Biden administration, the liberals, right? The ones who were like, oh, Donald Trump should not get an extra year, it's ridiculous, were actually okay with Moïse doing the same thing. Oh no, Moïse's fine. Well, it turns out it's because Moïse is US backed. He's a businessman known as the Banana Man. And so he's been very good to US corporate interests in Haiti. So they backed Moïse, as I said. Good for interests in the United States. Good for, of course, the elite in Haiti, which comprises, of course, of the business owners, lighter-skinned Haitians. Not exactly a champion for the people of Haiti. Now, understand, too, that being U.S.-backed in Haiti makes you incredibly unpopular. In fact, if you even utter the name Clinton in Haiti, well, I mean, I can't guarantee your safety. Let's just say that, okay? Because of what happened with the Clinton Foundation and, of course, the U.S. intervention overall in that country. with the United States backing, corrupt presidents over and over, of course, on behalf of U.S. corporations. And so, in fact, I'm going to go here to a quote from Dahoud Andre, who's a longtime Haitian community activist who spoke to Democracy Now! About this. He says that rumors had been flying about who was responsible for the death of Moïse. He said, quote, "As of right now, we have no clue where this assassination came from," but added that the Haitian people had loathed Jovenel Moïse and described him as a, quote, "tool of the United States." And just to point out how connected, as I said, Moïse was to the United States and backed by the West, obviously. There's an article in The Intercept, actually back in 2019, that detailed how US-backed mercenaries were paid to attempt to transfer $80 million from a government fund. This is an oil fund that was supposed to pay for roads, bridges, infrastructure, etc. Moïse, what he wanted to do was take that money, that $80 million, and put it into his own account. Oh, great. So now that mercenary group, made up of, it's some of the weirdest people, right? There was one that's like a bodybuilder, moonlights as a country singer, and they, of course, they had no idea. They were Blackwater contractors. And so just this weird mix of people that botched the entire thing. And in fact, I'm going to go here from The Intercept here. This is Kim Ives and Matthew Cole. Here's what they wrote. "Many details of the operation remain murky, but based on interviews with the Haitian law enforcement and government officials, as well as a person with direct knowledge of the plan, a picture of the clumsy effort by the mercenaries emerges. What at first resembled a comedic plot about a group of ex-soldiers looking for a quick and easy mercenary score was in fact a poorly executed but serious effort by Moïse to consolidate political power with American muscle. None of the Americans spoke directly with Moïse or received official paperwork from the Haitian government authorizing them to undertake the mission, according to the person with direct knowledge of the operation. However, Moïse presidential aide Fritz Jean-Louis and the plot's other key organizer, Josu Leconte, a Haitian American from Brooklyn and a close friend of Moïse, do not appear to have been rogue operators. So, very likely, since they were working on behalf of Moïse, they were working with Moïse. So now they ended up paying these mercenaries about $10,000 up front, and we're going to pay them $20,000 total, and actually said that they were also, quote, saving Haitian democracy. So within 3 days of landing, that team would be arrested, then released and sent back to the United States, having escaped criminal charges in Haiti. And all of this, by the way, was happening during historic protests against Moïse for raising gas prices by 50% and backing the Trump administration's efforts to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And of course, trying to embezzle money from that fund that was supposed to go to the hospitals and roads and all that stuff into his own account. So basically, the entire thing happened to have pissed off a lot of people. Regular Haitian citizens who despised him, of course, because of his corruption. Then you had his political foes. And again, you had, as a result of the attempted political coup, you had the wealthy bourgeoisie who were very mad about this as well. So, yeah, there's more too. Turns out there's also a lot of organized crime factions going on in Haiti. There's a group literally calling themselves the G9. This is a group of 9 different organized crime syndicates, right, that have gotten together, headed by a man known as Jimmy Barbecue. Yeah. Okay. So now Mr. Barbecue, and of course that's not his entire name, but he said that he was, quote, launching a revolution against the country's business and political elites. And as Reuters reported last month, violence had spiked in Haiti's capital due to what the United Nations called unprecedented levels as rival groups battle with another for the police for control of the streets, displacing thousands or worsening the country's humanitarian crisis. So now, Mr. Barbecue, or Cherizier, I believe, is a former police officer and heads this so-called G9 Federation of Gangs. So yeah, if it's not already confusing, it always gets worse. Now, Mr. Barbecue is a suspect in several massacres of citizens in recent years, among other crimes, for which he was sanctioned late last year by the United States. Although he depicts himself as a community leader that is filling the void left by weak institutions. So, and of course, I am getting new reports that they have made arrests. And of course, some of the people had been killed. There were gun battles going on between police and these gunmen, these mercenaries. And so it's a matter of time before we figure out who they are actually working for and what's going to happen. So now there was also an interesting video that came out that was security camera footage from the assailants. Now, again, they came up to the door and they said, we're DEA, we're DEA, DEA. Well, they also had been filmed speaking to each other in Spanish. Now, Spanish is not the main language of Haiti. Again, most likely these mercenaries were likely contracted from other countries, whether it be Colombia or even the United States. Nobody knows. Nobody knows about what actually happened. And so we're going to have to see what kind of information comes out about that. But it is very complicated. There is a lot of players. Again, some people were speculating that it was a crime syndicates or people that, from the bourgeoisie that were hiring, the wealthy people inside of Haiti that didn't like the coup attempt. Maybe that they had actually had hired some, mercenaries. I don't know. We don't really know what happened. So yes, and they speak French Creole in Haiti, or Haitian French, and so people speaking Spanish in Haiti is a little strange. You don't see a lot of that. And so again, it's all super complicated. But I can tell you one thing for sure: the Haitian people are not doing well under anyone right now. There is corruption. There is incredible instability. There's the American interventionism, like I said, with the Clintons, the gang violence. It's a terrible situation. And understand that U.S. media, we only tend to pay attention, unfortunately, when something like this happens. And when, of course, U.S. interests are at stake. Again, Moïse was absolutely a friend of the Trump administration, backed by the Biden administration, and was against Maduro in Venezuela. And so it gets, like I said, incredibly confusing unless you look at some of the players and what they represent. And so all I can say is that, hopefully we find out, we get to the bottom of who was actually involved, who ordered these mercenaries. But I also wanted to express solidarity with the Haitian people, the people who are actually suffering through all of this right now, the poverty, the foreign meddling, the crime, the corruption, all that stuff, having to deal with all of that stuff. And so I hope that at some point Haitians can actually elect a leader once again that represents their interests instead of foreign interests or corrupt interests. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.